Hello and welcome to this week's Get Clued Up. This week is Get Clued Up on women in film, and we've got an amazing panel for you, so I'll let them take it away.
Hi everyone, my name is Isra Al Kassi and I'll be your host today. In light of International Women's Day, we've been invited today to talk about the landscape of women in film. And the film industry is quite a big beast, and it has quite a lot of elements within it. So I'm really thrilled today to be able to discuss everything from filmmaking to distribution to writing about film to exhibition and running collectives. As mentioned, my name is Isra and I am currently a freelancer in the exhibition audience development part of the biz. And I'm also co-founder and co-run Tape Collective, which is a collective which started off as offering alternative cinema events. And we've expanded quite a lot to doing everything from offering consultations on running events to discussing diversity and inclusion in the film industry. So I'm going to hand it over to my guests to introduce themselves. So Angie, if you could go ahead.
Hi, my name's Angela Moneke. By way of introduction, I also co-founded alongside Isra Tape Collective and co-run that as well, along with another one of our sort of film industry contacts, Nellie Alston. And Tape has been running for about 5 years. Isra sort of covered the broad sort of strokes of what we do. And yeah, it is essentially, its main thrust is, looking at inclusion, like genuine inclusivity in the industry, alternative spaces, and sort of platforming, things that we think are really cool. And then alongside that, I also work as a production executive at Working Title Films, which is a film and TV production company based in central London that's been running for like a number of decades. And most recently, I also started producing short films under a new sort of independent outfit called Monogram, and have been producing shorts for the past couple of years and currently developing a slate of new films as well. That's me.
Hey, my name is Lois Stevenson. I'm a visual artist and filmmaker. I've worked and made work for the last 8 years in the film industry, including a feature film called Into the Mirror. I've done several shorts and music videos, and yeah, that's basically me.
Hi, I'm Isaura Barbe-Brown, and I'm an actress primarily, but recently I started writing about film articles, film reviews, and I have a monthly column as well. Most of them are based around horror, and my column's with The Final Girls and their Bloody Women film journal. And I've written for other companies for about horror mostly, and mostly about Black women in horror. But yeah, that's it, and acting in plays and films and voiceovers and all that stuff as well.
Amazing, thank you all. Just wanted to sort of touch base in terms of how you enter the industry and the obstacles you faced in the beginning. And Angie, it'd be really interesting if you could tell us more about what it's like working, how you became a producer and how it all started for you in the industry before you started working on your own short films.
Yeah, so I feel like a lot of people in the film industry actually end up having a really roundabout journey into it, because of how I think there's obviously like a push to make the industry more diverse and inclusive, and there's been a lot of conversations, but historically there's no sort of getting away from the fact that the industry has been very, very gatekept, and as a result of that, there's not necessarily always like a clear route into it. So I do feel like a lot of people have, these roundabout ways of getting in. Mine personally, I didn't come from a film background or anything like that. I actually did a law degree at LSE in London, and really enjoyed that degree actually, and did it, and finished it and graduated. And then I guess didn't really know what I wanted to do. So I sort of for a while straddled like these sort of two sides of things, that being sort of more law-based experience, and like working as like a legal intern for a charity and like volunteering for charities and stuff, while at the same time during university I'd started writing film reviews. So I continued that onwards going forwards post-graduation, which led me to Barbican Young Programmers, which is like a scheme Barbican run, which is really great, where they get a bunch of young people in a room together every week talking about films and sort of guiding them on how to like program festivals and program what's shown in their cinemas, and sort of be across like every stage of it, from the planning to the marketing to to like sort of promoting it and getting it out there and doing all the copy and everything. So sort of having like these little pockets of film experiences, sort of how I curated my own sort of film background in a way, I guess, and sort of used those things like the review writing and the Barbican scheme to get a job in TV as a researcher. So I was working in factual television for a little while, researching and sort of starting to do some production work and some post-production work. And off the back of that sort of led me into getting a job at Working Title, which is where I work now, as part of like that internship scheme. And I've been here for like 5 years now, and learn a lot about the feature film industry. Now that we're covering TV as well, learning a lot about the TV industry as well. So yeah, that was kind of like my route in, and I've sort of just worked my way up from there. But yeah, it was basically it was like a weird mixed bag of, once you get your foot in the door, you're able to work with specific companies and really get a handle on the industry. But before that, it was sort of building stuff for yourself and pulling together like different bits of work from different areas, which like I wouldn't say is a bad thing by any means. Like I think it definitely it can give a person like a more nuanced or just like unique background, and it just means that everyone who's coming into a space hasn't come from the same place, and it's just different perspectives and experiences that are being added into the mix. So yeah.
Thanks. And that's something I think about quite a lot, and I'm fascinated by in the film industry, is that everyone I meet does so much. And a lot of the people that I sort of find myself working with are people that are self-starters and have had to sort of mold their own path in the film industry. And I'm quite intrigued to see whether that is out of necessity, or if it's something that we're doing just because we love it so much. And so, Isaura, you do quite a lot as well. You write plays, you write poetry, you write about films. You're also an actress. And so you've entered two very difficult to access industries already, with film and journalism. Could you tell us a bit about what that was like in terms of getting into film writing, what obstacles you faced and how you overcame them, if there weren't any?
Yeah. It kind of feels like it was an accident. I used to work at Picture House Cinema, and everyone who worked there, especially the one in Hackney when it just opened, was involved in film somehow. So it meant I was watching an enormous amount of film there, but also at the BFI, at film festivals, because everyone like worked at London Film Festival, everyone like worked at everything else. So I was surrounded by all these people, and we talked about film all the time. And it meant I met lots of people as well that were involved in other facets of film. So I kind of had these like connections to people just from like socializing and stuff. And then obviously Anna and Olivia started The Final Girls a while ago with the podcast, and then they started the Bloody Women Journal last year. And because there wasn't much else to do. There wasn't much in the way of acting to do. And I particularly love horror films. I know that me and Anna talked about it quite a lot when we bumped into each other. And when I saw they were looking for commissions, I kind of was just like, maybe, like, I was like, well, I might as well like try. And it's because I had a very specific idea for the first article I wanted to write, which is about, it was called Psycho Killers Prefer Blondes, and it was about how there's such a lack of black final girls and how it doesn't really make sense. And so I had a very specific idea about wanting to write, but I'd never written anything like that before, and I fully expected it to be rejected, but they accepted it and I got to write it, and then it's just been kind of this ongoing thing. And the interesting thing I've learned about film writing is that once stuff is out there, obviously you do it on your own and then you send it to like your editor, and then yes, it's up on the site, and like maybe your friends and family tell you about it, but you don't know how many people have actually like read it or seen it or cared about it. But I started getting like people getting in touch with me and being like, oh, I read that piece that you did, and then I got to write another one, and they'd be like, oh, and then other people would be like, I read that second piece you did. So it's all kind of, and then through the final girls themselves, like the people they work with, I've got commissions from that. So I've had quite a lucky entrance into it, in the sense that it kind of all just fell into place at the right time, and that I happen to be writing about stuff that people are quite interested in talking about right now. And because horror is such a niche thing, that if you're interested in horror, there's like obviously a lot of horror fans are always interested in reading about horror, and so there's always someone who's going to want to read your work. And with the reviews and stuff, because then after the final girls asked me to write reviews for them for a festival, and that was quite daunting because I'd never done that before, but was also like a brilliant learning curve, because writing about something you haven't chosen yourself, like someone going, watch this film and then give your opinion about it, also was a way to like learn about how to understand film and write about film from like a non-personal perspective. And yeah, so it's actually been fairly like lucky for me. It's I don't really know where to go with it, as in the sense of like I don't really plan it out at this point. I'm not like I really would like to write for these people or those people. It just all feels kind of lucky when I get a chance to do it. And I do feel like there has definitely been one or two commissions where I've been a bit like, where it's definitely been, I've been asked because I'm a Black woman and because they need someone who's non-white to write about it, but they don't necessarily care about my specific view. It's just that I'm a convenient person. So there has been some things that have been quite jarring about it when you get edits back where they change what you say because it's too something. Like you're too, I don't know, like adamant about certain points or whatever. But for the most part, it's been all right actually. And I do think it's because I very specifically write about horror, and not many people like get upset with you for having an opinion on horror necessarily. So luckily.
Thank you. And Lois, you made a feature film quite early on in your career. And I'm quite curious to hear about how you went about doing that in such an independent way, and how you feel filmmaking has changed since you made your first feature.
Yeah, so I started making moving image at university, sort of like in my final year, sort of found it and was like, oh my God, I love this. And I think I made my first film, Now You See Me, and yeah, just completely fell in love with filmmaking and working with people. And then when that was exhibited at Chelsea College of Art, I was then approached by two producers, like writer-producers, to direct what is now Into the Mirror. It had a weird name before that. But yeah, I was kind of lucky in that sense, because yeah, I wouldn't have expected to be approached by people from seeing my like first film. But I did, and we started meetings, and I was completely naive to what making a feature would mean. And it was a 3-year process, from pre-production, like fundraising, and then making it, plus film festivals. So it was like a crash course, complete crash course in filmmaking. And a lot of people were like, what, you're doing a feature kind of like first. Like and I've only ever done one film before, and they were just kind of baffled at that because it wasn't the natural route that a lot of people that I was surrounded by that worked in film were directors that would do. So yeah, so I guess like filmmaking has changed a lot since then for me because I felt very unsure a lot, and I think definitely when you feel so new and you're doing this huge project, you get made to feel, especially as a woman as well, get made to feel like you don't know exactly what you're doing. And I think because I was coming from an art background, they were like, oh, you didn't go to film school, or you didn't, you know, study film. Or so I found a lot of the time I was like, oh, I don't know if I'm doing this right. But I think the way it's changed for me since doing that project and doing projects since then is that I kind of have more confidence in like my vision, and that no one can really tell me there's like an exact way to do something. And also just having faith in sort of meeting people, working with people that you really like working with, and that, you know, that you can get in touch with these people afterwards and, you know, let's start a new project. I think that's happened a few times for me where, yeah, I've ended up connecting with someone from a project and then we've made something amazing together. And so it's just sort of having faith that if you're making these connections and having fun with what you're doing, that, you know, you can keep making work. I think it was loads of times I was like, I don't even know if I've got any films left in me, like especially after Into the Mirror. I was just like, I don't think I have anything left. But yeah, I think it's sort of working with people and just, you know, continually working on, even if it's a small idea, and how eventually that can amount to something bigger. Yeah, and I have a lot of faith in that.
Thank you. What I'm picking up on is, because you were saying a crash course, but the question is who taught you how to make film? And I'm quite interested in knowing where does this, you know, what training have we had? But also reflecting back on the path you've taken into film, what do you wish had been in place when you started? Andrew, do you have any thoughts on that?
It's a big question, but I mean, probably a lot of things, to be honest. Like, you know, the idea of like who taught you and training, all these things, you know, kind of ties back to the whole that, you know, no one had like one special place that they could go to that sort of ran through everything and like gave you all the resources that you needed and all of that kind of stuff. It definitely, yeah, becomes like a much more, not only like self-motivated, but just having to like piece things together yourself, I guess, bit by bit, which, you know, probably strengthens you in a lot of ways, but there are like cons to it as well. There's disadvantages to like having to be put through those paces in a way. But I mean, in terms of like things that would have been great if they were in place, I guess there's so much. Like I think just from like something as basic as just like more transparency, just openness, like organizations. I think, you know, engagement, because it also takes people who are already there to sort of like open things up a little bit more. All of these things which I think are actually slowly happening, but definitely I don't think we're really there when I was trying to get into the film and TV industry. I think for me, like looking back on it, I definitely sort of realized that I know a lot of people talk about how, you know, like certain individuals or groups might want to be in the industry, but just not knowing how to get in or how to get a foot in the door. And I think looking back on it, I realized it actually went like one step further for me. Like, I think there were also a lot of people who, it goes a bit further than not knowing how to get in. It's also just not feeling like those jobs are real. They don't feel like real things that exist. They're sort of like, there's this like mythicism around them where it's like, I know someone does that, but I don't know how they're doing it. And it wouldn't even occur to me to try to know, because it just doesn't feel like it's a real thing. I don't know if I'm explaining it right, but it honestly, like for a long time, didn't like occur to me that I could even like that wasn't even an option, almost, I guess is what I'm trying to say. So yeah, but like I do feel like to an extent that is changing a little bit. There's like more and more things cropping up, and there's definitely like more of a way to go at the same time.
I completely agree what you said in terms of thinking it's not real and thinking you can't do it. And the more people I meet, I'm like, actually, we can all do this. And that in terms of there's a beauty to how almost how fluid it can still be, the industry, because there are certain elements of it that are super rigid, but our approach has all of us has been really fluid and sort of just see what happens. And this is what, what I believe in. I loved film and cinema and everything, and I just never thought I'd work in it at all. And now I run it. I run the whole business. But I like at the time, like when I was growing up, I was definitely fascinated by film and filmmaking, and I thought it was beautiful. And then I went to uni and I studied languages, and then had to disrupt my studies. Again, I would, occasionally go to BFI South Bank. I would sort of just like look over at the river and go, oh, this is beautiful. Wouldn't it be great to be able to work here? Be involved in this industry, but always just was the person buying tickets to the screenings, as opposed to ever thinking I'd be able to work in that institution or anywhere near it. And then I met someone who wrote film reviews and put a call out asking if anyone wanted to write film reviews. And so I joined that, and then all of a sudden I resumed my studies and I decided to add film. Just to say, you don't have to study film if you don't want to, but it is an option. And so I added film, and then when I graduated, I did the Barbe-Brown Young Programmer, which is how I met Angie, and then all of a sudden we were running tape. And so I completely agree in terms of you're not always told that it's something you can do. And then sometimes when people talk about the path into the film industry, it's bizarrely rigid, when in actual fact that's not really how it works. In actual fact, you just have to meet people. You need to know what it is that you want to do. Lois, do you have any thoughts in terms of what you wish was in place when you started off making films?
Yeah, I think because I coming from like a non-film background, I just all the people that were like around me when I was first making films, they were sort of only doing that, and I felt like such a failure because I was working in hospitality like full time, but then trying to do this on the side, and everyone would be like, oh, what, so you're not a full-time freelancer? I'm just thinking, I feel like such an imposter, and I kind of wish there was more of like a role model or a mentor that was going to say just, that's okay, and it's okay. A lot of these people, I realize now, they were still making like corporate stuff, and they were working in film, but they hated that as well. And I think that's also an equivalent to working in a bar job that you don't want. And I think, as long as you have like the energy to make your own work, I just wish someone had, been a bit more transparent, like you were saying, Angie, about that. And then it's, more openness, less ego, and sort of, willing to say you can do it however you want. That's what I wish was different then.
Before we go to, to add to that, also picture house background, by the way, because I know you mentioned that and I forgot to say that's Lois as well. All part of meeting, which I again think is really interesting, because technically it's a cinema and exhibition, and it's a has influence in distribution and film market in general, but also is a hospitality job. And is a front of house job. And it's just really interesting how those two sort of work together. But sorry, was there anything you wish? I mean, you said you felt like you were lucky in the industry, but do you think in terms of what would you introduce to make it easier for other people to access or enter the industry?
Oh, I actually think more stuff like this. Like, I'm not sure I would ever have replied to or like pitch something to someone looking for commissions if they weren't people I knew. I don't know if I would ever have done that. It made it feel accessible to me. And at that point, they'd already had me on the podcast. And I was like, oh, they care about my opinion to a certain extent. But other than that, it just feels like a closed thing. it feels like this group of, especially when you're writing about film, it just feels like these very specific people who get to do this thing, and you just don't know, like it feels like magic in some ways. Like when people are seeing films before everybody else, I'm like, how are they doing this? And it's literally just because they write for people and they've gone, can I have a copy of the film? And the person's gone, yeah. Like, so, and it's not that mysterious at all. It's like quite straightforward. So yeah, I think more stuff like this, more stuff where people tell you, oh, actually, I wasn't a writer before this, like not officially, and I didn't study film or anything like that. I just like it and tried it, and it's worked out. Yeah, and I think what Angie is saying about it's starting to happen. Like there are more and more things like this happening, especially for women, which I'm really happy about. And I'm seeing more and more stuff. Like I've read in the last like couple of months, or like last few months, journalists, especially women of color, writing down the process of how they pitch. So being like, this is how I pitch this article to this place that I don't work for all the time, just so that someone can go, oh, okay, that's a step-by-step of how to write a pitch, how to send it, who to like send it to, like how to be professional. And just even it makes it more accessible. It makes it seem more possible and more real, because you're seeing that it's just an email. It's not some magical connection that you have to have or some like secret password or code. It's literally you're just emailing with an idea and hoping they pick it up. And so yeah, I think I can't say I wish it was in place, because I felt quite, like I said, I felt quite lucky, but I'm glad it's becoming more normal now. Like what we're saying about transparency, like I'm glad that that's becoming more of the norm, rather than it being this feeling like this horribly competitive, like scary thing. That it's more like people are going, no, come, like come in, like join, like right, we want to hear what you have to say as well. So I just hope it continues, and I hope people continue to be as generous with the information, you know, as they seem to be being right now, and with, you know, their contacts and stuff. Like so many women again have like been, so when I've just sent like a little cheeky like DM on like Twitter being like, hi, like, and I'm assuming that like they're probably busy, and I've got the responses that are just like, oh my god, write to this person, this person, this person, they offered this much money for a commission if you have this kind of idea. And it's been just endlessly like helpful. So yeah, I'd say the world's more open now. We have more social medias, like people have their information more places, and if they don't mind you contacting them, and you're doing it respectfully, like hopefully it's a more open thing and more people are giving that information out, is what I would say.
I definitely think there's a lot to be said about making this industry a kinder place. And I think the confusion lies in merging art with business, because it is a business, and it's for some reason it's competitive business, but that's because everyone insists on having really tiny teams. Because like when I remember film writing, I never got paid for a commission or for attending festivals. In my early days, I would buy a festival pass myself. I'd take time off work, I'd attend everything, and then I'd write it for a website that never paid me and didn't compensate me. And so I think it's really interesting that people are like, but it's so competitive, everyone wants in, it's fine not to pay people. And I don't know if the industry in general is becoming nicer and kinder, but I like to be part of that change, where I'm just in the place where I don't work with projects, or I don't work on anything that I don't believe is a place that you can go, I don't feel well today, and that's okay. And you know, you don't feel well that day, or you're not excited about a project, and then you don't necessarily have to do it. And it's funny what you said about in terms of access. Actually, when Wonder Woman 1984 came out around December, there were loads of tweets with people just being like, when the reviews were coming out, people were just like, how did you get to watch this film? How did you get to watch this film? And I think it's really funny that in terms, you know, you've completely mentioned it in terms of people just think that there's some person who's like sitting in a booth turning on the film just for some people. It's on a link. That's where the film is. It's fine. And my next question was, again, for everyone, is, as women in film, do you feel like there's a fight for inequality and gender inequality seeping through your work? And if so, how does that manifest itself? Lois, do you want to start this one off?
So you mean sort of like if that sort of thing is coming through in like my art, in my film? Is that what you mean? Okay.
If it's a priority in terms of how you work or the audience, who it's for, and
yeah, absolutely. It definitely drives who I want to work with. You know, the kind of characters that I want to show in my films. Yeah, like the energy as well, I think is really important for me. I think I sort of work with mood and feeling a lot. It's not even necessarily heavy on dialogue, but I think it's more about the energy that female characters are giving off. And definitely I find I'm just about to finish a short where I've worked with a lot of female and non-binary artists, and the collaborations felt so strong. I know we've all felt it as well. And I think just, when I was watching the edit the other day, and it feels really powerful, and I'm so proud of that. And I'm proud that this like determination, this sort of empowerment is coming through. But yeah, no, I definitely feel that, and I'm proud of that as well.
And Angie, do you want to talk about everything tape does? Should we do that together?
Yeah, let's. Well, to as well, because I mean, I'm sure you'd agree, is like, I feel like because of exactly your very question, championing women on camera, behind camera is just like instinctively where we've gone to. Like, we are so fascinated by what female filmmakers are up to, what they're working on, what they're creating, who they are, what their interests are, what their motivations are. It's just a very instinctive and intuitive like attraction for us, and that leads to wanting to like do whatever small bit we can to share that with audiences and give it an extra little bit of spotlight. And yeah, I just think that's what draws our focus, basically.
It's literally how it started 6 years ago. I think something that I still feel is I'm so perplexed by the underrepresentation of women and women of color, and just sort of anyone that hasn't been represented on screen, whether it's because they have a disability or where they are in the world, that there's just such a lack of it. And I don't understand it, and I still don't understand it. And so when we started TAPE 5 years ago, we were involved in the Barbican Young Programmers, which was an amazing opportunity. We got to curate programs for the Barbican, and I think in terms of training and learning, that is really where I learned the most about the industry. That we would still meet up afterwards and go, yeah, that was cool, but what if we did something ourselves? And it was just, I think it was recognizing that there was stuff going on out there. Films were being made. There are things out there, and also what would happen if we were part of the opportunity for more films to be made, and for more sort of filmmakers to emerge, or for more filmmakers to feel inspired to continue their work. And here we are, like 6 years later, and I think it's gone from discussing representation on screen. I think our interest was also in filmmaking, and therefore really interested in who was behind the camera, because representation looks very different for a lot of people. And I think for me, as I find it really dull if someone's going to tell me a story that I don't want to hear from them. And I think that's literally what it comes down to. Is I was asked recently, why it's so important to champion films by women. And I just think it's just, otherwise it's really boring. And I'm not saying all films that aren't by women are dull, not at all, but I just think that the fact that we're happy for the landscape to look like that, I'm quite shocked by, when you could have so many stories, and you could really, not to sound too cliche, but you can literally travel the world if you got to hear, if you opened up the screen to other films. And Isra, you write specifically about women in horror. So how do you feel? Does that come from finding that there's a lack of representation?
I think it's, for me as an actress as well, like watching, it's always quite odd to watch as much film as I do and be like, and spotting yourself like every like 10 films. It's like really weird still, like you're saying. I don't really understand it, because you're just like, well, I know there are black actresses, so I don't really understand where they are. And there's like, for an industry that you assume would be quite progressive because it's dealing in like art and stories and stuff, it's actually really traditional in a lot of ways, and quite conservative in a lot of ways. And there's still like a way to do things, especially like in the mainstream and whatever. And so people create these myths about why this person couldn't be in that role, which aren't true, like at all, which have been proved to not be true, like time and time again. But with horror, I think I write about it because horror can cover like quite a lot of things. As well as it being a horror, there's usually like some other aspect of it, and a lot of the time women are victims in it. And why particularly like writing for the Final Girls is because obviously it's about the women who fight and survive and win in like some way, but they have to go through this awful thing to do it. And it feels like a genre you can do almost anything with, and people are still quite tentative at doing all the things they could be doing with it. And it's baffling, like watching films and knowing that, like, again, Jordan Peele is going to make a film with like Keke Palmer is going to be the main antagonist. I'm like, why is it just Jordan Peele? Like, genuinely, like, he can't do it on his own. And since we know now, like, because of the successes of his other films, because of the success of Us and all that stuff, that he's, clearly it's not a money thing because it made money, everyone loved it. Like, I don't I don't really understand why more people aren't going, oh, you can and like, I was glad that His House came out last year by Remy Weeks, because seeing those two people on screen in that kind of film is just so alien to and I was like, this is incredible. The fact that this has ties to who they are as people, to their past, and it's about that, but also a horror film. It was just great. And I was like, why aren't more people doing stuff? This is the future of horror. This is like what makes it more interesting. Otherwise you're just doing the same things. But it's across the industry. It's like, it's fascinating, the stuff that people will say to you when you're writing. Even like, I wrote a play that was about two women trying to like cover up they've accidentally murdered someone, they're trying to cover it up. And so many guys who talked to me about it were just like, oh, it doesn't really feel like something women would do. And like their ideas about why it was like weird were like, I was like, I mean, it's like kind of like a dark comedy. I don't think two people in general necessarily behave this way, but it was just very specific about the fact that they were women and they couldn't get their head around that women would do something like this or to be viewed in that way. And every woman I sent it to loved it. And I was just like, right, so we're lacking, we're craving it, we want it. This is why films like, women get excited about films like Promising Young Women and all stuff like that, where we get to be like bad or like something else other than just a victim. So I think it's fascinating, and it definitely does drive like my viewpoint. And like, I'm always interested in the role that women play in films, especially if they're a Black woman or a woman of color, or if they're like, a combination of that and like queer or disabled. I mean, it's like, it's so interesting what part they play, how much screen time they have, and there's still a huge way to go, huge like but yeah.
Just so many excellent points, and I've got so much to say. So if Lois and Angie, if you want to jump in and remind me of all points. But the interesting thing that you said in terms of those stories we're craving, who made those decisions? I worked in cinema exhibition where I've been in the marketing department, and I'm like tweeting about, I don't know what I'm tweeting about, but it's like, you're sort of promoting these films, but it's really hard to know who you're promoting it to, because surely people that have been coming to cinema will just watch that one. And then, and then there's like community outreach, which is really complex, because you're like, the stories there's not enough stories, and like you said, when a Jordan Peele film comes out, that is literally the meat for that year in terms of what people call a diverse audience, or like, where people finally are sort of seeing something else on screen. yeah, and just what was I going to say about the? Remind me what else you were saying.
I'm sure. Just
Sorry,
about
I got really excited. Oh, actually, I do remember
okay,
my point. In terms of people being shocked by what they see on screen, I do really think it's what you're exposed to massively. So I think Portrait of a Lady on Fire was huge in terms of. I think everyone agrees that there was that scene at the end where there's a man in a scene. I don't know if you remember this, but there's a man, and it's quite jarring because you've watched 2 hours of just women, or an hour and a half of just women on screen, and then all of a sudden a man appears, and it's really, really jarring. And I was watching, I don't know, during the first lockdown, I was watching that typical sort of LA dirty cop films from like the 90s. And the only woman who was in it was a nurse, and the rest were just men that are just like dirty cops, and they're just, you know, shooting each other. And at the end of it, I was like, I can't believe that I've been just so overexposed to this, where I probably for the, you know, the majority of my film watching years have been exposed to this idea that it's okay to watch. You know, this is why the Bechdel test is quite interesting, because not a lot of films pass, and the bare minimum for that is that there are two women who are named in the film, and that they're having a conversation where they're not talking about man. And the fact that really not a lot of films pass that, I think, really goes to show in terms of what we're exposed to. But also what you were saying in terms of the how traditional the film industry is. Do you think that with everything that's happened in the past year, that we'll see a change when things open up again?
I'm not sure, because every year there's a feeling of hopefully it will change, and every year we're like kind of disappointed. Like you just look at the Golden Globes this year and it's like, oh, we're back again. It's just like a couple of steps forward and then we're way back again to where we were. But then you look at something like the BAFTA nominations and you see the films that are involved, like Minari, Rocks. You know, there's all these great stories from people who we don't get to hear stories from nearly as much as we should, and they do really well and people love them and people connect with them. And I'm just hoping that the myths that have been built up around storytelling and film in particular get like just slowly being taken away, that you can't tell stories about certain people because no one will be interested, because it simply isn't true. And yeah, it's akin to like how I see the film. It's akin to like when what's it called? The WAP came out by Cardi B, and the reaction, the like pearl clutching reaction from men in the music industry was hilarious. And it was just like this because women were doing it, and it's like we watch men do this all the time. And it's the same when talking about women being violent, particularly like how they talked about Promising Young Woman and all this stuff, like some of the reviews that came out by men. And you're just like, you do not bat an eyelid at any number of like Scorsese films where there's like unbearable violence sometimes. So you're just like, oh god. But the minute it's women doing it, it's this awful thing, and they don't understand what we're doing, and we must want to kill all the men. And it's just like, I mean, it's such a leap, like such a reach. I just don't even understand. And I think hopefully it's being taken away because people are just more vocal, like questioning it more now. And the more and more women who are working in film, who do question it, who do challenge that, I think it's just going to get better, personally. Yeah,
there needs to be a sort of synergy, I guess, between, ultimately you need someone at the top that sees the frustration, well, I'm not going to call the audience, you know, the frustration that's coming from the audience or people that aren't seeing themselves on screen. And, you know, one of the most outraged sort of scandals was just Captain Marvel, just for being cocky. She was like a bit too sassy. But she's got crazy powers. And so I just think she can do whatever she wants because she can speak to people whichever way she wants. I know, I can't believe I'm talking about Marvel, but anyways, but nobody ever said that Iron Man was cocky. That's all I'm saying. And he walks into a suit. Like, that's all I'm saying. Angie, you've still had to keep production going during pandemics and lockdowns. Do you think there's been a shift in terms of how films are being made?
Yeah, well, like, also just to sort of tack on to take the thread from what you were saying onwards, like everything that you guys are saying was so right and on board of all of it. And like there literally has constantly been sort of like what Isaura was saying, like this slide back. Like every so often we have like all the nice conversations and like hit all the right notes, and you know, something comes out and everyone's like, this is really amazing progression. And then it like, then there's this slide back, like, you know, even looking at something like Bender Like Beckham, which was like, this is amazing. And then what did we get after that? Like, where was the consistency kind of after that? And like, even what was happening at the time, the film was so groundbreaking and I think it's an amazing film. But then even like just looking at how like Parminder Negra got less shine than Keira Knightley, and so many things you can get into. But it's constantly like this give and take. You know, sort of like when people leave stuff long enough that they almost start to forget, or we just get very comfortable. But like, I would like to think that where we are at right now, there is hope for and like energy for stuff to actually continue meaningfully and to actually do less of a slide back this time. I mean, obviously, like as I said with the Golden Globes, that's the whole thing. But then like the BAFTAs are doing slightly better, even though structurally I still feel they've got major issues that they need to address so that none of that goes away. But it's like all the stuff that Martin Scorsese was saying recently sort of really put that into like the frame for me, because while I do agree with a lot of the stuff he's been saying about cinema and its art and the integrity of it, I just felt like he missed such, like there was just a glaringly obvious point he was missing. And like, you can't really have any of this conversation before you address that point, which was just like, who was cinema excluding until the freedom that all the streamers brought, that all the technology brought, like who was being kept out of, you know, the canon, and who was being put on as like, these are the greatest filmmakers of all time. And the lists are always the same and they're always typical and they're always exactly who you expect them to be. Like while a lot of other people were, you know, busy being forgotten or ripped off or not funded or not paid right or just not given their dues. Like all of the things we've seen now have kind of like, the side effect of it is just a lot more freedom. There's a lot more like ownership. There's a lot more being able to just kind of get up and do yourself, or to make opportunities for yourself so that you can get to be Jordan Peele, who has his first look deal with Universal and is doing all the work. But I think, you know, stuff like that is changing the way that we make cinema, I hope for the better. And I think if that's the, you know, if that's the consequence, like there's pros and cons to everything. And if, you know, the technological business side of the industry feels like it's inflating a little bit, you know, and that's coming at the cost of who's getting access to it, then as far as I feel like that's the price we have to pay, and like it's a price I'm willing to pay. But yeah, and then obviously like there's been like major disruptions because of COVID and all those kind of things, but it feels like the film industry is incredibly affluent and wealthy. Like it will get back up on its feet, it will adapt, and we will all continue to move forward. I think it's just important to remember like, who are the people who have the resources and the funding? Who are you putting that down on the table for? Because we know that it's there and it's all possible, and it's kind of just about bringing all of that together. Pretty much.
Yeah, and time flies, so I think we could keep having this conversation for a few more hours, but just to wrap everything up, it'd be really great to hear from you all who work in various different departments in the film industry. The one thing that you're really sort of very proud of the work that you've done, and what advice you'd give to any student who's trying to get into the film industry in 2021. Lois, do you want to go?
Okay, yeah, I'll go first. I I think I maybe like mentioned it a bit earlier, and I guess it's sort of still involved in what we're talking about, is sort of making connections with people that are willing to support you and like lift you up. I think definitely there's been times where I didn't know where to go next and felt quite on my own with it, but I think you definitely have to, you know, make allies and, you know, people that are willing to support and, you know, mentor you, give you advice, you know, help you out on set or, you know, in pre-production. I think, that is like the main thing that I would say, is to sort of make as many like trusted connections as you can.
That's something you're proud of?
Sorry, something I'm proud of. I think it's, you know, I think coming out of a really quite intense production period with a feature, and not all of it, I mean, a lot of it was positive and I was really proud of it, but I think, you know, I felt like there was a bit of like a, I don't know, like a bit of a downward thing in my confidence, because you just sort of expect things to happen. But I think I'm proud of sort of, you know, persevering and just carrying on persevering despite it being difficult. It's not even a specific project really. I think it's more just about picking yourself up and just keep on going.
Thank you. And Isaura, and one thing you're very proud of, I'm adding the very and a piece of advice you'd give to students who'd want to be able to do what you're doing.
Advice I give is something that we've all talked about, that there isn't one path. If one way doesn't work out, it doesn't mean that it's particularly done for you. It just means that you might have to go at like a different angle or a different way, or it might have to be like an eventual thing rather than an immediate thing. And I think, like Lois was saying with connections, someone once told me to network horizontally rather than vertically. So network with like your peers, like they're all in the same position as you and they're all going to start moving into those industries at the same time. And rather than always trying to get the step up, like to someone the step above you or a few steps above you, actually like make those connections with those people, because then they're going to be the people you get to work with and get to bounce ideas off, and they're going to be them doing the new like stuff and whatever. And maybe eventually you meet those people a step above, but like focus on the people who are at your level. And something I'm proud of, I guess I'm proud of just trying. Like when I honestly had never written an article before last year, and now I have a column which seems bonkers. It doesn't really sound true, but like it's you don't know where it's going to lead you. Like the most you can do is try, and the worst that someone can say is no, and actually that's not that bad. So I'm just proud of myself for like very sweatily and nervously putting myself out there and it working out. I'm like very happy about it.
Yeah, definitely put yourself out there. The emails that Angie and I get from people is really interesting, and it's beautiful because I love that people feel that they can get in touch with us, and I love that people think that, you know, that they've sort of picked up on the fact that we can give them advice. And we get loads of emails that are just like, I made this film, what do you think? And, you know, that's great. And, you know, so not to be sort of shy of reaching out to people. And most people who are, like you said, on our level will be really receptive to trying to sort of get back to you. Angie, any wisdom on production?
Actually, one of my points, because like I feel like it's worth emphasizing anyway. One of my points was literally just like Isaura's point on like who your network is. I think literally the people who you start working with at the beginning will be the people who you go up through the industry with. Like they will be people you're like, oh yeah, I've known so-and-so for like 10 years when we started at this and that kind of thing. And they're also the people who will back you and put in a good word for you. It's actually a really good thing to pick up on, that like a lot of people are looking at someone in a higher position to be like, I want them to notice me and I want them to give me that opportunity. But it is also the people who are working around your level who will be the ones that are in a position to put in a good word for you, that someone will listen to. So that should never be taken for granted. And another thing that should never be taken for granted is obviously, like we all know about working hard and you know, learning quickly and being willing to put in the work and time and the energy, but it will never ever go like amiss or never be taken for granted, like the power of your attitude. Like film, especially like all sorts of departments in the film industry, the hours can be long or they can be unpredictable. You can end up having to put so much of your time into the thing that you're doing that everybody just really appreciates having people around them who are just good vibes, just like good energy, like enjoying being around that person is definitely a factor that can make people just want to work with you all the time. And so like obviously the work ethic is super important, but like also just don't underestimate the power of just being like a friendly, warm sort of presence. And it's like simple as that. It's like nothing to be like calculating with. It's like just very simple. Yeah.
Amazing.
Proud thing, if I still have to do that. Yeah, I don't know. Nothing. In essence, I'm just proud of making it into the industry, kind of. I actually never thought I'd work in it. There's no reason why I should be working in this industry. And yet here I am. And I just, if there was one thing I would want everyone to take away, it's there's also literally no reason why you shouldn't be in it either. Like not a single one. If you want to do it, it's totally possible. It's not scary or mythical at all. Like honestly, just work for it and meet people, do everything you can and ask for advice. And there's so many people willing to help if you look for it.
Yeah. And a lot of people are doing it, and there's a shift in the movement, whether you want to be part of that movement in terms of making everything more accessible and being able to access the industry, or if you're waiting for it to sort of just, you know, to be happens, that to make it easy for yourself, just don't give up. Thank you so much to Lois, Isaura, Angie. I really enjoyed today's conversation. Thank you so much for being here. And I hope that this was useful to anyone listening and watching. You can reach us on Tape Collective. Like I said, we are really sort of open to anyone getting in touch, and we'll be posting about Lois and Isaura on our sites as well, and channels that you can connect. And thank you so much, and we'll be passing over to Hattie.
Amazing. Thank you so much, ladies. That was some great advice there, especially for our students going into the arts industry. It can be hard enough, but in an upcoming recession, that's really scary. But thank you so much for your advice. Great. So if you enjoyed watching this panel, lucky you, we've got another panel discussion on March the 31st at 2 p.m. That's a Get Clued Up on support for gender diverse people. That's going to be another panel of guests, including a guest star YouTuber, Sarah O'Connell. So tune in for that one. Thank you very much for watching and see you soon.